we're just going to go and hope we come up with something decent. So I had a whole script written about the Black church and its relationship to morality and to Black manhood. And to be honest, I just don't feel comfortable talking in depth on these issues. Because, I mean, come on. If you're international, I don't think there are very many international viewers of this channel, but if you are, you may not be aware of the racial politics in the United States. And I get it if you don't understand, but you're just going to have to trust me on it. It's a weird look. It's weird for somebody like me to talk about something that is so integral to the Black community as the Black church is. So, obviously, however, it's going to be impossible to talk about a book like Go Tell It on the Mountain without talking a little bit about the Black church. But I am going to have to talk about it to a certain extent, but it's not going to be as in depth. I'm going to leave links in the description or in the comments or something. I'll leave links somewhere. Almost knocked over everything. I'll leave links in the description or in a comment or something with links to creators that I think are more apt from a personal perspective to discuss the intricacies of the Black church and Black manhood as well. We are going to touch on those subjects because the book is about them, about that, that intersection between Black manhood and the Black church. So it will be impossible not to talk about it somewhat, but I just want to make it clear that this should not be taken as a definitive video on the issue. And if you are interested, and you should be interested because it is very interesting, you should go out and learn more about these topics from people who are more knowledgeable, both personally and academically, on them. Okay, I think that covers my bases. Now for the introduction proper. So, Go Tell It on the Mountain is the 1953 debut novel by James Baldwin. James Baldwin, a famous advocate in the civil rights movement and in the gay liberation movement of the 50s and 60s and 70s and so on until he died. But his first novel is probably his most famous. His second novel, Giovanni's Room, is also very famous within gay circles, but less people read explicitly gay literature, so less people are going to read it. And thus, leaving Go Tell It on the Mountain is probably his most famous work. It tells the story of John Grimes, a young Black and heavily hinted at gay child, although it's never explicitly said that he is gay. It is very heavily hinted at that he is, as well as his father, Gabriel, a church leader in a Pentecostal Black church in New York City, and his mother and his aunt. The stories of his father, mother, and aunt help to paint a picture of how the family has dealt with the racial and religious trauma leading up to the story of the young John Grimes, who is struggling to understand himself and his place in the world in which he finds himself. That's the overview of the book. There's a very, very basic overview. If you want a more in-depth overview, you can go read the Wikipedia article on it. It's got a very good plot summary. Or you could just, I'm just spitballing here, but you could just go read the book. It's only a little over 200 pages. It's very good. Very easy read. Well, not an easy read, but it's not a difficult read. You can go do that. You should go do that. I have every faith in you that you, somebody watching a book channel on YouTube, will in fact read a book. All right, quick note before we continue. After the initial introduction, before we talk about the book, I remembered that I'm supposed to tell you to like and subscribe the video. So please do that. because it's fun. And leave a comment below because I like when people leave comments. That is why I do this, is to talk about books. And so if people talk about books with me, it makes me happy. And I like that. And I also like when people like and subscribe because I like watching the little number chart go up. That also makes me happy. But mostly I just like the comments. I love it when people comment. It's the highlight of the one comment every 2 months or something that I get. Highlight of my day at the time. So please do that. And then now back to talking about the actual book. James Baldwin said that this is the book he had to write before he could write anything else. And I think that's because it's such a personal novel. Because it's such a personal novel, rather, it is for that reason that it is as powerful of a novel. It is as confused of a novel as it is. And in that confusion is why it's powerful, because it grasps the confusion that John has. John, a young black boy, is struggling with his own masculinity. He's struggling with how he is supposed to be a black man in a world in which he is emasculated for his race and for his sexuality. A sexuality that he has no real conception of. Because this is the 1930s, New York City. There's no gay liberation movement at this point in time. He has nobody to look up to in that sense. And as far as the emasculation because of racism, he also has no one to look up to there, because the main person that we look up to understand how we are to be men is our fathers. And for John, his father is kind of a terrible person in much the same kind of way that Okonkwo is a terrible person to his children. Gabriel is a terrible person to his. Gabriel is emotionally abusive. He's physically abusive. He abuses his wife. He oftentimes acts out and blames his children for things that that's not their fault. And yet at the same time, he puts on the show of being this great and good man within his church, within his own personal community. And so John has to see this man that he personally hates. He detests his father. He has to recognize that his father, this person that he hates, is well respected within his wider community. And how do you square that circle? The only other person that John has to look up to is Elisha, who is not even a man himself. He's just an older boy. I think he's 15 or 16 to John's 13-ish. And John doesn't even look up to him as like an idealized form of man, because John is infatuated with him. It is on Elisha that John's budding homosexuality is pointed, if you will. And so while he looks up to him as an older boy, and as somebody that he is secretly pining for, even to himself, it's all very confusing. Because even that relationship with Elisha is doubly emasculating, because not only is it homosexual in nature, but it is also a religious in nature. The Black Church has an interesting conundrum that I'm not sure is found in other religious groups. I'd be more than happy to discuss this further, although I don't know. Or to have people tell me if this is true for other religious groups as well. But the Black Church is a very patriarchal church. I will link a Pew Research paper below, and it talks about how within the Black Church, more so than other churches, you see the idea that black men ought to be leaders of both the church and the community. And we see this with more so than women. And yet, at the same time, most of the butts in the pews in black churches are women, right? Most of the churchgoers are women, and yet most of the leadership is men. And so if you aren't a leader within the black church, it's kind of emasculating to not be one of the leadership. And we see this with Gabriel as well. Gabriel goes from being a leader to not being really a leader, right? He's a prominent pastor when he lives in the South, and when he comes to New York City, he loses that status, and that leads to part of his anger and disappointment. But we see this, how John is promised, he's often seen as being, he's going to be a future leader, but he's not a leader yet. And so he has that passive, emasculated role currently within the church. And he has that passive, emasculated role about pining for another man. And he has that emasculated role of being physically and emotionally abused by his father. All of this is happening while he's struggling and being told he needs to be a man, and yet his legs are being cut out from under him by all sides. And this is the main struggle with the novel, is how do we become a man? How does John become a man? How are black boys expected to become black men if they're constantly being undercut by society, by their religion, by their parents? And there's no real answer to this social one. And there's no real answer to the religious one either. I think it's worth noting. But there is a discussion. There is a discussion about the parents and how we deal with the fact that our parents are disappointing to us and don't help us to become the best version of ourselves. And I'm not saying this is true for everyone. I'm just in the context of this book. John has a religious conversion moment. He has a vision. And in that vision, he sees his father. Quote, "And his father approached. I'm going to beat sin out of him. I'm going to beat it out." All the darkness rocked and wailed as his father's feet came closer. Feet whose tread resounded like God's tread in the Garden of Eden, searching the covered Adam and Eve. Then his father stood just above him, looking down. Then John knew that a curse was renewed, from moment to moment, from father to son. Time was indifferent, like snow and ice, but the heart, crazed wanderer in the driving waste, carried the curse forever. And I think it's very important that we see this connection between John's father, John's physical father, and with God, who is often referred to as our heavenly Father, if you will. Because the idea of a curse transferring from the sins of the father and the sons being cursed because of the sins of their father is a very Old Testament idea. And it is of particular note for the black community in America because of the somewhat outdated theological argument of the curse of Ham. Now, the curse of Ham is the idea that the Noah's son Ham saw Noah when Noah was naked and drunk, and instead of covering him up, he laughed at him. Noah sobers up, realizes what happens, and says, "Ham, you are a scumbag, and you will forever be the servant of your brothers." Ham then goes on, and ostensibly is the progenitor of the African race. This is not, I should say, or this was a prominent theological belief in the 1600s and the 1700s, 1800s, and much of the 1900s as well, but is today not as well thought of. But it is something that would have been prominent within the ideas of the black church. Even though the black church obviously disagrees with it, it is something that they would have been aware of. These were not, these were not secret theological ideas. These were things that were very well known and well promulgated by white theologians. And so you see that sort of same thinking here. It's not necessarily the curse of Ham, but you do see the idea of a constant curse. And the curse is not necessarily from God on high, but it has the same power as one from God. And it is the curse of anger, of disappointment, of a lack of self-fulfillment that gets taken and combined up within the heart and passed on to their child. Gabriel, the reason that much of this novel takes place as flashbacks to Gabriel's parents and to Gabriel's aunt is not just to lengthen the story. It's not just an idea of like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting? No, it's very much because we need to understand them to understand to understand John's problem. John, as I have said before, is the product of his parents, and his parents' anger and his parents' disappointment falls upon him as a curse from father to son, as we see. And so to understand John's problems, or why John is having these issues, we have to understand Gabriel. Gabriel is the son of a slave. His mother was a slave woman, was an enslaved woman, who became free after the Civil War and had Florence and Gabriel late in life. And by this account, the singular account we have, theirs was not a great life. It was a very hard life. They were very poor. But more than that, we can see the psychological toll that their mother's enslavement had on them, because their mother, despite being ostensibly free, obviously becomes never leaves the South per se. She leaves, but she doesn't leave, if you will. And she instead exchanges the chains of literal slavery for the metaphorical chains of her responsibilities. Her responsibilities to her children, and her responsibility to her community, and her responsibilities, as she understands it, to God. Instead of truly becoming free, she merely switches out one master for another, if you will. And this affects Gabriel and Florence. Florence longs for freedom, longs to be not just for literal freedom from slavery, but the metaphorical freedom of get me the hell out of this place. Gabriel was the apple of his mother's eye. If he had never been born, Florence might have looked forward to a day when she would be released from her unrewarding round of labor, when she might think of her own future and go out to make it. With the birth of Gabriel, which occurred when she was 5, her future was swallowed up. There was only one future in that house, and it was Gabriel's. To which, since Gabriel was a man-child, all else must be sacrificed. Now, this talks about the sexism, and I'm not talking about it fully, but it is another important theme within the novel, and it should be taken into account, even if I'm not going to talk about it, because I don't want this video to go on forever and whatnot. But it is something that is important, and it is something that you should look into when you read the book yourself. And you should read the book yourself. But we see that Florence wants this freedom that she cannot have because she is forced into subservience to her mother and now to Gabriel as a man. Gabriel is not a good Christian child. He spends much of his youth gambling and drinking and whoring and just being a constant disappointment to his mother and to his sister. And despite all of that, his mother still loves him, still prays for him, still thinks that everything needs to go into Gabriel. And this obviously embitters Florence. Florence thinking that she's being the good daughter. Why doesn't she get the good prayers? Eventually, Gabriel and Florence's mother dies, and Florence then leaves. I've had enough. I'm out, and she leaves to go north. But Gabriel stays and takes care of his mother and converts to Christianity. He gets himself baptized. He has his come to Jesus moment, if you will, and he becomes not just a Christian, but he becomes a prominent pastor. And in fact, the middle of the novel, at the very center of the novel, is his big sermon, his fire and brimstone sermon. It's not just a sermon about loving Jesus and the love of Jesus, but it is a call to abandon our sinful ways. Quote, woe is me, woe is me. Yes, beloved, there is no righteousness in man. All men's hearts are evil, all men are liars, only God is true. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Yes, and in him was life. Hallelujah. And this life was the light of men. Dearly beloved, when God saw how men's hearts waxed evil, how they turned aside, each to his own way, how they married and gave in marriage, how they feasted on ungodly meat and drink, lusted and blasphemed, and lifted up their hearts in sinful pride against the Lord. O then, the Son of God, the blessed Lamb that taketh away the sins of the world, this Son of God, who was the Word made flesh, the fulfillment of the promise, O then, he turned to his Father, crying, Father, prepare me a body, and I'll go down and redeem sinful man. And it is here we see the contradiction. It is here that we can see the initial contradiction with the curse. The curse from father to son is that God gave his son to man to break the shackles of sin, and yet at the same time curses him, because prior to this he is living in innocent sinfulness, and now he is acutely aware of his problems. And Gabriel becomes acutely aware of his problems. He turns away from sin. He is forgiven of his sins of the past before he becomes a Christian, becomes a pastor, and now when he falls into sin again, when he has an affair with a younger woman, when he has an affair with Esther, who is a younger woman, and he has a love child out of that affair, and he abandons Esther, and he abandons Royal, his son. Now, instead of saying that he can be forgiven, now he is weighed down by that sin. He is forever weighed down by his failure to act as a man, right? Because a man takes care of his problems. A man takes care of his children. A man takes care of his affair partner. I'm not sure about that. That one might be a little on the iffier side, but you are supposed to take responsibility for the things you do. Gabriel doesn't do that, and in doing so, he becomes aware of because he's a Christian, he cannot just be forgiven. He is forever weighed down by that. And because he is weighed down by that, this is the curse. This is the curse that John realizes exists. This curse that Gabriel is a failure in his own right. That Gabriel is a failure, not just is a failure and a hypocrite, and had to flee the south to come north, not because he wanted to, but because he could not stand any longer living under the conditions of his own failure. So he has to flee north. And in doing so, he ends up reenacting the same problems with his new wife, Elizabeth. He drags her down with him. He drags their son down. He drags their children down because he cannot accept his own failure. He cannot accept his own failure, and in not being able to accept his own failure, has emasculated himself in a way that the racialized society, in a way that the emasculation of the church, the emasculating factors of the church cannot do. He has cut himself down by the legs, and in doing so, he then in turn cuts down John. And this is the curse. This is the curse that John recognizes in his religious conversion. This is the curse that John sees and that John recognizes as something that he needs to overcome himself. And hopefully, in recognizing that curse, he is able to overcome it. And we're given the promise that he can overcome it. The final line, "I'm ready," John said. "I'm coming. I'm on my way," is an indication that not only is he ready to be a man, not only is he ready to literally go with his mother, not only is he ready to become a follower of Jesus and a leader within the Black Church, but he's also ready to just become a man in general. Hopefully that wasn't too hard to follow, because it was very mishmashed in my head. I don't know why. For some reason, I had difficulties talking about this book. I'm not entirely sure why I found it so difficult as I did. Part of it is the subject matter. Part of it is the idea of me as a white man trying to explain. I don't know that this is really a uniquely Black experience, but it is certainly the experience of the novel is the novel itself is uniquely embedded within the Black experience, if you will. This is a very famous novel. It is a very important novel within African American literature. And so I think it's just, I try to do my best. I do my best, and that's all that can be asked of, I suppose. Our next novel is actually not a novel. It will be a set of novels. It is... Where is it? 1 second. Try not to break everything. It is the collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges. So that'll be fun. I know very little about Borges. I know very little about his works. I do not know why I own this book. But we're going to read it, and it's going to be fun. So hopefully we'll have something to say about it. If you found this video interesting, thank you for watching, firstly, if you got this far, and I hope you did find it interesting. And if you did, I hope you leave a like and you'll subscribe to the channel. So I hope you'll do that. I hope you'll continue. If you have anything to add to the conversation, please leave it below, because as always, I do this because I like talking about books. I really just like talking about books. And if you leave a comment, you talk about books with me, it would be one of the greatest moments of my life. So thank you again. I appreciate you watching, and I hope you will continue watching into the future.